The second Triumvirate is a real soap opera. There are so many different storylines that come into this. It's just fascinating to look at. One thing I didn't talk to you about yesterday, and I should have pointed out, was in yesterday's lecture, there's a picture of the forum. And as I start this lecture off, I want to go back to that picture and kind of show it to you right now. So when Julius Caesar was killed, the senators, I don't know what they were thinking, but they didn't really have a plan beyond killing Julius Caesar. And so Julius Caesar's, or not Julius Caesar's slaves, but slaves came along and took Julius's body and brought it back to Julius Caesar's house. There, Mark Antony got a hold of the body. And a couple days later, I think it was, they were planning on cremating his body up at the family graveyard. I think it was called Mars Field. But the slaves took it down into the forum. This is the forum as it stands today. This little spot right here looks like a little shed. That's the former site of the temple to Julius Caesar. That is a building that Augustus, Octavian, built for Julius Caesar for people to worship his soul, his body, his remains. But that's where they cremated his body. And so they brought his body down into the forum. And the people insisted that they cremate the body in front of themselves. And so Mark Antony gave a little speech, and he was really trying to insert himself in with the population, trying to grab their support so he could fight against the senators. The senators, I don't know what they're thinking. They didn't plan beyond killing Julius Caesar. I don't know if they thought that the people would come to their side or not, but they didn't have much. And so as soon as they saw the population really rally around the body of this dead man and give some support to Mark Antony, a lot of these senators disappeared. They fled out into the countryside. Some of them left the country altogether. They weren't sure how they're going to harness this monster that they created. Now, with Mark Antony, okay, he goes and gives a speech. He claims to be the heir to Julius Caesar, and he really tries to insert himself politically into Julius Caesar's role. Cleopatra was in the city when Julius Caesar was killed. She was living in a house down along the Tiber River with her son Caesarion. I do not know what she did or how she got out of the city, but she disappeared from the city shortly after the death of Julius Caesar. Now, the funeral pyre, the fire that they set to kill Julius or to destroy his body, it sounds like a remarkable scene. A lot of them said that it reminded them of a barbarian chieftain's funeral where people were throwing clothes on the fire, jewelry, weapons, all those things went into the fire as they burned Julius Caesar. Now, yesterday, and I didn't go over this part of the lecture either, but Octavian's mom, she sent Octavian a message saying, now's the time to act. You got to play the man. You got to come over here and do what you need to do. Take up this mantle of Julius Caesar is left for you. I think she did that prior to the cremation and shortly after his death, because shortly after that, she changed her mind. She actually started to flee the country or flee Rome as well. Octavian was studying in Greece at the time, and Julius Caesar was planning to go join him there. But when he got the message, he immediately headed back to Italy. As he came across the Adriatic Sea, he met some forces, some of Julius Caesar's troops on that western or the eastern side of the Apennine Peninsula, and he got them to swear loyalty to him. And so he picked up that mantle that Julius Caesar left behind. And as he was coming into Rome, he ran into his mother, and his mother said, "No, don't do this. They're not going to let you." He proceeded on to Rome. Now in Rome, you have this, again, a vacuum of power. Many of the senators are left. You have Mark Antony, who is claiming to be the heir of Julius Caesar. You have Octavian, who in the will is the heir of Julius Caesar. And you have these two gentlemen team up with the third man, Lepidus. Now, Lepidus was a cavalry officer for Julius Caesar. And these three men form that second triumvirate. Now, this is where it gets very complicated. So that about 42 BCE, we have that second triumvirate. And Lepidus, I've seen some other things that I've read about him, was he was not that ambitious, and he didn't see himself as taking over power of Rome. I do not know if that's the fact or not. I've seen different things about Lepidus. But let's step back a second. Look how they worked it out with Lepidus. Eventually, in 36 BCE, Octavian approaches Lepidus's troops, pays them off, and Lepidus goes into Africa. I want to say he retires down there. He may have been doing some other things down there, but he didn't make any plays for that Roman power structure beyond 36 BCE. Now, backtracking a little bit, in between Octavian and Mark Antony, there was a lot of soap opera going on. First of all, just like his uncle, Octavian took his sister, Julia. Now, you'll notice that the Romans are not too creative in their names of women. A lot of times, and we'll see this when we get down to the family life of Roman women, they'd be named the same thing. So you might have Julia 1, 2, 3, 4 in the same family. But Julia is Octavian's sister, and he marries her off to Mark Antony. But by the time he marries her off to Mark Antony, he's already into this. He's smitten with Cleopatra. The meeting between Cleopatra and Mark Antony is almost a fairy tale. He calls her to him to see what role she played in the death of Caesar, and she decks out her boat. It's gold, it's silver. She has people playing the parts of cherubs. They're fanning her, and I believe she comes in as the goddess Isis of Egypt. And it's really strange, that story, how she comes up, they meet, and they start this relationship. They do have several kids. They didn't get married at that time, but they have several children over the next few years, even while he's married to Julia. This political arrangement between Octavian and Mark Antony, again, they're looking at that marriage relationship to form the bond between them. It doesn't work out. Now, Mark Antony, what he does is he eventually divorces Julia, and he reportedly his will gets confiscated by Octavian, and Octavian takes the will before the Senate, and he reads it to him. And in the will, Mark Antony says that he wants to be buried in Egypt with his love, Cleopatra, and it's all this very strange stuff going on. The main thing I want you to notice in this lecture is that Octavian used, it could be propaganda, it could be real information, used this information to really damage Mark Antony as a Roman. He was challenging Mark Antony's Romanness and pointing to the fact that Mark Antony was living with a foreigner in the East, that Egyptian queen, Cleopatra. Romans didn't like that. They wanted Romans to be Romans. And so he was very good at identifying Mark Antony as an enemy of Rome and not to be trusted. And so Octavian was able to raise his own stock through his besmirching Octavian. Now, in 42 BC, long before all this took place, the last of the senators' rebellion was taken care of. Brutus and Cassius were killed in the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, and that just left these two gentlemen, after Lepidus was gone, to battle it out. Now, after Octavian read the will to the senators demanded war with Mark Antony. And they even invited him to Italy to fight in Italy. They said, come here, we'll let you land, we'll set up this battlefield, and we'll fight right here and be done with it. He didn't trust the senators or Octavian, and so they negotiated a location to fight, which was Actium over in Greece. By all accounts, I think Cleopatra had 500 ships, very large, could maneuver very well. The Romans, I don't know how many ships they had, but they were smaller, more maneuverable, and were able to handle that naval battle against Cleopatra. The forces land forces were pretty large, and they were lined up ready to fight. But before it got too heavy in the fight, Mark Antony, and one of the sources I saw, that said that he saw Cleopatra fleeing the naval battle. And so he turned around and left. Probably the most dangerous thing that can happen in a battle is to see your commander, your king, leave the battlefield. Julius Caesar, a lot of times he inspired his own troops. Where it looked like they were going to lose the battle, he would go right into the battle and fight. And that would inspire his troops to fight even harder. I've seen it the other way too. I believe Hasdrubal, one of Hannibal's brothers, was in a battle with the Romans, and he was losing the battle, so he led the charge, and the Romans killed him. And so it's not always a guaranteed thing that leading your troops into battle that they're going to come out okay. But anyhow, at Actium in 31 BCE, Cleopatra left, Mark Antony flees, his troops demoralized, surrender. Octavian does grant them immunity, and they're set free eventually. Now, the final battle happens down in Alexandria. They take the city of Alexandria in 30 BCE in August, and it's there that Mark Antony and Cleopatra both commit suicide. Not like Shakespeare says, but separately. I do think Cleopatra used a snake, but she used a cobra, not an asp. They say that the cobra is a quick death, and the asp's bite is slow, painful, and very messy. And so she went the other way. Now, on this assignment, okay, compare Julius and Octavian. See what you think about the two. What did one do right? What did one do wrong? Did Octavian learn from Julius Caesar? You see the questions down there? Give me your answers. Love to hear from you. Email me your questions. Good job and take care.